The smell of pine and cinnamon filled the air as Alex drove through the quiet, snow-covered streets of their childhood town. It had been years since they'd last visited, but the thought of returning to the old house for Christmas, with the family gathered around the tree, felt like an inevitable pull. The holiday traditions, the memories, they seemed like they belonged to another life. A time when things felt simpler, when everything hadn't been clouded by the long years and the distance that now existed between them and their past. As the house came into view, nestled between towering oaks, Alex felt a wave of nostalgia and unease. The familiar white shutters, the large front door that had seen too many winters, and the warm glow from the windows made the place seem like a welcoming embrace. But something about it didn't sit right. It was as if the house had aged differently over the years. The paint had peeled more than it should have. The once perfect chimney looked crooked, and the wooden porch creaked with the weight of something hidden beneath. Alex parked the car and stood for a moment staring at the house, trying to remember the feeling of safety it once brought. But as they walked up the path to the front door, that sense of familiarity gave way to a tightening in their chest, a gnawing sense that something had changed. The door opened before Alex could even knock. Their younger sister, Emma, stood there, smiling wide, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She welcomed Alex with a warm embrace, but Alex couldn't help but notice how her eyes flicked toward the house, a brief, almost imperceptible hesitation in her expression. "Welcome home," Emma said, pulling them inside. "I've missed you. Mom and Dad will be so happy to see you." The warmth of the house enveloped Alex, but as the door shut behind them, there was a sudden chill, a draft. Maybe, but more like the house had exhaled a breath it had been holding for years. Inside, the living room was beautifully decorated, just as it had always been at Christmas. A towering tree adorned with colorful ornaments and twinkling lights, stockings hung by the fireplace, and the soft glow of candles on every table. But the place felt different. A certain heaviness lingered in the air, one that didn't seem to belong with the Christmas cheer. "Mom and Dad are upstairs," Emma said, leading the way. As Alex followed, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the house's appearance, but the quietness in the air, the muffled stillness that felt almost unnatural. Upstairs, Alex found their parents sitting together in the cozy study, wrapped in a blanket, sipping hot cocoa. Their father, Tom, looked up first, his face breaking into a wide grin as he stood up to greet Alex. "Welcome back. It's been too long, kiddo. How's everything?" Tom asked, pulling him into a warm hug. "It's good to be back," Alex replied, smiling, though they still felt that uneasy flutter in their chest. Their mother, Lucy, hugged Alex tightly too, brushing a strand of hair behind their ear as she asked, "You look different. More grown up, I suppose." "It's the city life," Alex chuckled, trying to shake off the unease that had settled deep inside. "So how's everything going in the city? Work?" Tom asked as they all gathered around the fire, making small talk. But Alex couldn't help but notice their parents' nervous glances toward each other every so often, as if there was something unsaid between them. Before Alex could ask, Emma walked in with a tray of cookies, her eyes downcast. There was an oddness about her demeanor, something off about the way she placed the tray down without making eye contact. She quickly excused herself and left the room, leaving Alex feeling more unsettled. "That's strange," Alex muttered under their breath, but their parents didn't seem to hear. They were too busy discussing plans for Christmas Eve dinner, their voices jovial but hollow. The room was warm, the fire crackling, but Alex's skin felt prickled by an invisible cold. The night passed with little more than forced cheer, the family pretending everything was normal. But as Alex lay in the guest room later that evening, the old house creaked and groaned as if it were waking up from a long slumber. The wind howled outside, but inside, everything felt still too still. Just as Alex was drifting off to sleep, a strange sound reached their ears. A faint tapping, like someone knocking, but no one was at the door. The house seemed to be sighing, as if it were aware of their presence, watching, waiting. Alex shrugged it off, telling themselves it was just the house settling. But as they pulled the covers tighter around themselves, the tapping continued closer now, almost rhythmic, as though someone or something was knocking on the other side of the wall. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped, and Alex's breath became visible in the air. The knocking continued, faster now, as if the unseen presence behind the door was growing more desperate. The clock on the wall ticked louder, and with each passing second, Alex could feel something stirring in the dark corners of the room, something unseen but undeniably present. Just before they could reach for the light switch, the knocking stopped. But the air remained thick with tension, like a storm was about to break. Alex didn't sleep that night. The next morning, the house seemed to breathe a little easier. The lingering tension from the night before had dissolved somewhat, but Alex still couldn't shake the feeling of something being. Everything looked just as it always had: the grand staircase, the old portraits of ancestors lining the walls, the smell of fresh coffee wafting through the kitchen. But Alex couldn't help but notice the way the house seemed to shift slightly with every movement they made, like it was watching, waiting. After breakfast, they found themselves drawn to the hallway at the back of the house, an area they hadn't ventured into yet. The narrow corridor, which had once led to the old storage room and utility closet, had always seemed a little more somber than the rest of the house. It wasn't the sort of place anyone visited often, and growing up, Alex had always thought of it as a forgotten corner of the home. But this year there was something about it that made their heart race just a little faster. It was the door. Alex had passed it several times since arriving, but for the first time in years they stopped to really look at it. The door, once a dull brown, had accumulated an unusual amount of dust. It was a thick, heavy-thing oak, with brass handles and a pair of small frosted glass windows that had long been covered in grime. It had never caught Alex's attention before, but now it seemed almost impossible to ignore. The odd thing was, despite the layer of dust, the door glowed faintly, casting a soft, otherworldly light. At first, Alex assumed it was just the light filtering in from the cracked windows in the hallway. But when they leaned closer, they realized the glow wasn't from any source in the room. The light seemed to pulse from within the door itself, like something hidden, dormant, and waiting to be unleashed. Confused, Alex backed away, telling themselves it was nothing more than a trick of the light. "You're just tired," they muttered under their breath. "You're overthinking it." But even as they turned away, the glow lingered in their mind. The house was quiet, too quiet. It was always quiet in the mornings, especially around Christmas, when most of the family members were still asleep or busy with last-minute preparations. But there was a stillness in the air that felt more like an absence of life than peace. As Alex made their way toward the kitchen to find Emma, the creaking floorboards beneath their feet seemed exaggerated, louder than they remembered. The house wasn't old enough to make these kinds of noises, at least. It hadn't when they were younger. It was as though it were groaning, trying to speak. Just then, a faint sound echoed from down the hall. A soft tapping, almost like someone was lightly rapping their fingers against the walls, but there was no one around. The sound was faint, but it was unmistakable. Alex froze. The tapping grew louder, more deliberate, but just as quickly it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, but there was no logical reason for the sound to have occurred. No wind, no footsteps, nothing to explain it. With a shiver running down their spine, Alex turned to leave the hallway, but as they passed by the door again, something caught their eye. A flicker of movement behind the frosted glass. A shadow. Alex stopped dead in their tracks. The shadow didn't belong to anyone. No one was in the hallway, and no one had passed by since Alex had first looked at the door. The shadow lingered for a moment, growing darker, more defined, before it disappeared. Alex blinked, rubbed their eyes, and stared again. Nothing. It was just the usual dust and grime on the glass. Stop being ridiculous, they scolded themselves, but the unsettling feeling in their gut wouldn't go away. The shadow hadn't been a trick of the light, they were sure of it. Something had moved. But what? Trying to dismiss the thought, Alex headed to the kitchen, where Emma was busy arranging some ornaments on the counter. She looked up and smiled when Alex entered. "Good morning." "How's the family?" Emma asked, her voice light and carefree. "Good," Alex replied, but their voice felt strained. They wanted to say something about the door, but something told them Emma wouldn't understand. Instead, Alex forced a smile and asked, "Hey, is there something weird about the door in the back hall?" Emma paused for a second, her hands stilling on the ornaments. She met Alex's gaze, and for a brief moment there was something unreadable in her expression. Then, just as quickly, she blinked and laughed. "Yeah, that old thing. It's been here forever. I don't think anyone's touched it in years," she shrugged. "It's just a storage closet, I think. Dad always said not to bother with it. I don't know. There's something about it," Alex said, more to themselves than to Emma. But Emma didn't seem to hear. "It's just an old door," she said, her voice returning to its normal tone. "I wouldn't worry about it. Anyway, we've got a big day ahead, decorating, baking, all that good stuff." Alex nodded, but the unease was still there. They couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Maybe it was the door, maybe it was something else, but they couldn't quite put their finger on it. Later, after Emma had gone upstairs to help their mother, Alex found themselves alone again. The house was still, almost too still, with only the sound of the occasional creak from the floorboards and the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. It was then that they heard it again, the tapping. It was faint at first, but it grew louder and faster, as if someone were pacing behind the walls. The sound was almost rhythmic, like a steady heartbeat, and it filled the air with a growing sense of dread. Alex stood still, listening. They had no idea where the sound was coming from, but it was unmistakable, growing more frantic, as if whatever was making the noise knew they were listening. The tapping stopped suddenly. For a brief, fleeting moment, there was silence, but it wasn't comforting. It was too complete. It felt as though the house had gone entirely still, as if holding its breath. And then came the next sound. A low, guttural creak from the door. The door. Alex felt their pulse quicken as the sound continued, growing louder. The house seemed to shudder with each creak, as though something was pushing against it, something trying to get out. They looked toward the door at the end of the hallway, where the faint glow seemed to pulse just a little brighter. Without thinking, Alex found themselves walking down the hall, their feet dragging, heart pounding in their chest. Just as they reached for the door handle, the creaking stopped. The hallway was silent, the glow of the door dimming back into nothingness. Alex stood there, hand on the door, waiting. A cold draft brushed their face, and they hesitated, but a pull inside their chest urged them to open it, to see what was inside. But just as they turned the handle, the faint sound of footsteps echoed from behind them. Slow, deliberate steps, almost as if someone was following them. Alex whipped around. There was no one. The house was empty, silent, waiting. Alex sat in the dimly lit living room of the family home, watching the fire crackle in the fireplace. Christmas was drawing closer, and the house, though filled with the warmth of the season, still felt unnervingly cold in certain corners, especially near the old door. That door. The one that stood at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar, as if inviting someone or something in. It had become a fixture in Alex's mind since their return, and each day spent in the house only made the sensation of being watched more pronounced. Earlier that day, as Alex walked past the door, something caught their eye. A strange mark had appeared on the wooden panel, right at eye level. It was faint, almost as if it had been etched into the wood years ago, and only now revealed itself to the light. The shape was peculiar, like an old rune, or perhaps a symbol of some forgotten language. Alex ran their fingers along its surface, feeling the cool, rough texture of the wood. They dismissed it at first, thinking it was nothing more than a trick of the light or dust that had settled into strange patterns over the years. But as the evening wore on, the sensation of unease grew stronger. They couldn't shake the image of the mark from their mind, and as the hours passed, a gnawing curiosity began to take hold. What could it mean? Could it be a sign of something more? Later that night, as Alex was about to retire to their room, the air grew inexplicably colder. A chill crawled along their spine, and they found themselves standing in front of the door again. The mark was still there, but now it seemed different, larger. The lines had thickened, and the shape had grown more pronounced, almost glowing faintly under the pale light of the hallway lamp. There was no logical explanation for it, no breeze, no movement that could account for such a transformation. It was as if the mark itself had come to life. Alex hesitated, then reached out to touch it again. This time the wood felt warmer beneath their fingertips. For a moment they felt a connection, something dark and ancient pulling them toward it. But just as quickly as the sensation came, it was gone. The mark was no longer just a symbol, it felt like a warning. The kind of warning you couldn't ignore, even if you wanted to. Alex, a voice called from behind them, causing them to jump. It was their aunt, Margot, standing at the entrance of the hallway, her face drawn in concern. "Sorry," Alex mumbled, pulling their hand back from the door. "I thought I saw something, it's just this mark." Margot raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "It's always been there," she said softly, but there was an edge to her voice, a hesitation. "You shouldn't mess with it." Alex frowned, looking at their aunt. "Why? What do you mean?" Margot stepped closer, her eyes darting nervously to the door. "I don't know if I should tell you." She seemed to wrestle with herself, as if torn between revealing something she'd kept hidden for years and protecting Alex from the truth. Finally, she sighed and moved closer. "The door, it's not like the others in this house. It's tied to something that happened long ago." Alex's heart raced, a mixture of curiosity and dread pooling in their stomach. "What happened?" Margot looked at the door, her face pale. "Your great-grandfather, he was obsessed with the door, thought it held some sort of power. But it's not a power anyone should want to tap into. He thought he could unlock it, that it could bring him something to make him rich or immortal. I don't know. But all it did was bring ruin." She looked away, her eyes cloudy with memories. He vanished the night he tried to open it. And after that, strange things started happening. People in the family would hear voices, see shadows in the halls. Alex listened, a chill creeping up their spine. "What kind of strange things?" Margot took a deep breath, scratching noises on the walls, whispers like something was always just behind you. And those shadows, they seemed to move. It was as if the house was alive in a way. And the door, it never stayed the same. It was like it fed off the fear. "That's insane," Alex said, shaking their head. "It's just a door. It's just wood." Margot's eyes hardened. "You think so?" Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "I wish it were that simple. You think that mark, that symbol, just appeared on its own. Think again. It's a warning, Alex. You're not the first to notice it. And you won't be the last." Alex swallowed hard, staring at the door. The mark seemed to pulse now like it was alive, beckoning them closer. But Alex couldn't bring themselves to touch it again, not after what Margot had said. The room around them felt too cold, too silent, as if the walls themselves were listening. "You need to stay away from that door," Margot said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what it wants, but I know it's not something good. It's been here longer than you or me. And if you open it, if you let whatever's behind it in, there's no telling what might happen." Alex stood frozen, unsure of what to do. They were caught between the need to know the truth, to understand what was behind the door, and the deep-seated fear that gripped their heart. Could they trust Margot's warnings, or was she simply scared of something that didn't exist anymore? But as the night wore on, the house grew eerily quiet, and Alex began to hear it. The faintest sound, a scratching at the walls, almost imperceptible at first, then louder, more distinct. The sound of something moving behind the walls, scraping against the surface like claws against wood. Then came the whispering. Soft at first, like the rustling of leaves, but growing clearer, more urgent. "Let me in, let me in." Alex's breath hitched. They turned, eyes wide, and found themselves staring at the door once again, its mark now burning into their mind. Could they ignore it? Could they continue to pretend that nothing was wrong? That the house wasn't alive with some dark energy waiting to escape? No. The door had always been part of the family's history, a history steeped in mystery and dread. And now, it seemed, Alex was being pulled into that same story. The mark would not be ignored. As Alex turned away, they knew they would have to confront whatever lay beyond the door, whether they were ready or not. The whispers continued to echo in their mind, the darkness creeping closer with each passing second. And in that moment, Alex understood one thing clearly. The door would open again, whether they liked it or not. The days leading up to Christmas Eve were filled with a strange anticipation. The air outside had grown colder, and inside the old house, the scent of pine and cinnamon filled the rooms, but none of it could mask the unsettling presence that clung to the space. Alex could feel it every time they passed the hallway, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. And then there was the door that had begun to behave oddly. It was as if it knew that Christmas Eve was nearing, as if the very walls of the house were shifting in response to the ancient force that stirred behind it. Every night, as the evening grew darker and the wind howled outside, Alex would hear the low creaking of the door. It started as an occasional squeak, a soft sound that could easily be attributed to the house settling. But as the days passed, it grew louder, more pronounced, as if something was trying to break free, something ancient and insistent. The door would creak open just a fraction, enough to send a shiver down Alex's spine, but it never fully opened. It was as if it was teasing them, showing them just enough to keep them on edge, to keep their curiosity burning. The first time Alex tried to open the door, they were surprised at how heavy it felt. It refused to budge, no matter how hard they pulled. It wasn't locked, at least not in the traditional sense, but there was an undeniable resistance, an invisible force pushing back against them, as if the door itself was determined to stay shut. Alex stood there, hand still on the handle, feeling the weight of the door against their palm, sensing something dark and powerful lurking behind it. They let go of the handle and stepped back, a sense of dread settling in their gut. "Not yet," Alex whispered to themselves, though they weren't sure if they were speaking to the door or to the part of themselves that still wanted to know what lay beyond it. That night, as Alex lay in bed, they heard the door again. This time it was different. The creaking had a rhythmic quality to it, almost like footsteps dragging across the floor. A shiver ran through Alex as they pulled the blankets tighter around their body, trying to convince themselves that it was just the house settling, that it was nothing to be afraid of. But then, something else happened. A faint, almost imperceptible shadow moved across the hallway floor, just visible from the corner of Alex's eye. It was as if the darkness itself had shifted, a form emerging from the blackness. Alex froze, heart pounding, and turned their heads slowly toward the doorway. The shadow seemed to twitch, like it was aware of Alex's gaze, before it slowly faded, dissipating like smoke in the air. Alex blinked hard, certain they had imagined it. When they opened their eyes again, the hallway was empty. No shadow, no movement, but the door Alex's eyes darted to it was slightly open. It hadn't been like that before. A cold chill ran down Alex's spine. They couldn't explain it. It was as if something had been standing there, watching them, waiting for them to acknowledge it. The door had moved, but it wasn't supposed to. Nothing had touched it, yet it was open just enough to reveal a sliver of darkness beyond. Alex's pulse quickened. They wanted to go investigate, to step into that shadowy space and confront whatever had been hiding there, but something held them back. A voice, small and terrified, whispered in their mind, "Don't open it." The next day, Christmas Eve, arrived with an oppressive stillness hanging over the house. The tree in the living room stood tall and adorned with lights, but it couldn't bring warmth to Alex's frayed nerves. The door was still there, just as it had always been, but now it felt different. It felt like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something, and Alex could sense the weight of that expectation pressing against their chest. As dusk fell and the house plunged into twilight, Alex found themselves drawn to the hallway again. Their steps were slow, hesitant, but they couldn't stop themselves. The door was there, looming in the distance, and it beckoned with an almost magnetic pull. They approached it cautiously, every instinct in their body telling them to turn away, to leave it alone. But the closer they got, the more they felt the pull, as if the door were calling to them, whispering promises of answers to the questions that had haunted them since they first arrived. The house was eerily silent. No creaking floorboards, no distant sounds of movement from other parts of the house. Just the steady thrum of Alex's heartbeat in their ears. They stopped in front of the door, staring at it for what felt like an eternity. The faintest glow emanated from the crack between the door and the frame. It wasn't enough to light the room, but it was enough to make the air shimmer with unease. The door wasn't just opening anymore. It was alive. Without thinking, Alex reached for the handle. This time, there was no resistance. The door opened with an agonizingly slow creak, revealing nothing but a deep, suffocating darkness. The air behind it was colder than anything Alex had felt before, as though a chill had settled into the very bones of the house. Alex could feel the darkness pressing against them, wrapping around them like a cold, invisible hand. They stepped back, heart hammering in their chest. The whispers from before had returned, now louder, more distinct. It was as though the house itself was speaking to them, its voice low and guttural, urging them to come closer. Alex's hand hovered over the door, trembling. For a moment they considered pushing it open fully, stepping into the unknown, but fear gripped them. They had come this far, but they weren't ready, not yet. And then, just as suddenly as it had opened, the door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the house, sharp and final. Alex jumped back, breath coming in shallow gasps. The door was closed again, but it felt different now. It felt like it was watching them, like it was waiting for them to make the next move. A shadow moved just beyond the door, barely visible in the dark, but Alex saw it clearly enough. A figure stood there, tall and hunched, its features indistinct but wrong in a way that made Alex's blood run cold. They blinked, and it was gone. A moment later, the house was still. Alex's mind raced. What had they just seen? And why had the door opened only to slam shut as if in response to something they had done? It was as if the door itself had been testing them, drawing them closer, only to pull away when they were on the edge of understanding. Christmas Eve was just beginning, and already Alex could feel the weight of something ancient, something malevolent stirring behind the door. The darkness was alive, and it was waiting. The days after Christmas Eve were a blur for Alex. The house had become even more oppressive, as though the walls themselves had shifted, tightening around them. Each morning, the sunlight seemed weaker and the air heavier. The strange incidents continued to multiply, faint whispers at night, cold drafts that appeared from nowhere, and objects inexplicably displaced. But nothing had disturbed Alex more than the sensation that the door was calling to them. Each time they walked past it, an invisible pull seemed to draw them toward it, urging them to open it once and for all. The shadowy figure they had glimpsed by the door lingered in their mind, an image that would not fade. It wasn't just a trick of the light, wasn't just the product of their imagination. They had seen it. It had been there, standing motionless, its presence more unsettling than anything Alex had ever felt. The door, the shadow, the whispers, everything was connected. But the questions were multiplying faster than Alex could find answers. Determined to uncover the truth, Alex began digging into the history of the house. The family had lived there for generations, but there were always whispers about certain things that had been forgotten over time. The old house, with its creaking floors and dusty corners, held more than just memories. It carried secrets, some of which Alex wasn't sure they wanted to uncover. The first clue came when Alex found an old journal buried beneath the floorboards of the attic. It was dusty, yellowed with age, but the pages were legible. The handwriting was unfamiliar, definitely not their own, but the words were strangely familiar. They spoke of a curse, an ancient binding placed on the house by an ancestor whose name Alex had never heard before. This ancestor had believed that something malevolent had been sealed away in the house, something that could not be allowed to escape. The journal described the door in detail, calling it the gate. It wasn't just any door. It was a barrier, one that held back a dark force, a force that had once terrorized the family and the town for generations. According to the journal, the ancestor had discovered an ancient ritual, one that required the blood of a family member to bind the evil behind the door. But the curse had a cost. Once the door was sealed, it could never be opened. At least, not without unleashing what lay behind it. Alex's heart pounded as they read the journal. The blood of a family member. It couldn't be. Could it? They felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over them. Had their family been protecting them from something far worse than they could ever imagine? The more Alex read, the clearer it became that the door was far more than a simple piece of wood. It was the key to an ancient evil, one that had been held at bay for generations by the curse. And now, with the door behaving so oddly, with the strange occurrences intensifying, it was as though the evil inside was stirring, awakening from its long slumber. The curse was unraveling. That night, Alex went back to the door. The house was unusually quiet, the silence thick and oppressive. There was no creaking of the floorboards, no hum of the furnace. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic beating of their own heart. The door stood at the end of the hallway, its presence impossible to ignore. It was as though the house itself was watching them, holding its breath. Alex stood in front of it, staring at the dark crack between the door and the frame. The air was cold, colder than usual, and a faint glow still emanated from the crack, just as it had before. It wasn't the light of a lamp or the moon. No, this was something else, something ancient, something that seemed to pulse with an eerie life of its own. The whispers began again, faint at first, like the flutter of pages in the wind. But they grew louder, clearer. Alex could make out words now, but they weren't in any language they knew. They were guttural, harsh sounds, like something trying to claw its way through the fabric of reality. Alex couldn't look away. The door was calling to them. It wasn't just a door anymore, it was the door, the key to something dark and powerful. It promised answers, but those answers would come at a terrible cost. "Why now?" Alex whispered aloud. "Why is this happening now?" The house seemed to respond. The lights flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. The floor beneath Alex's feet groaned, as if the entire structure was shifting. They took a step closer to the door, their breath shallow. Something was different this time. The door was no longer just a barrier, it was alive. It was beckoning them to open it. Alex's hand reached out toward the handle, but the moment their fingers brushed against the cold metal, a rush of cold air swept through the hallway, pushing them back. The door seemed to resist, but not in the same way it had before. This was different, more forceful, as if something behind it was testing its strength, trying to break free. A voice, faint but clear, whispered through the air. "Do not open it, Alex." Alex spun around, heart racing. The voice had come from behind them, but when they turned, no one was there. The hallway was empty as it had been moments ago. Was it the house? The door? Or something more sinister? They took a step back, away from the door. But the pull was still there, tugging at them like an invisible thread, urging them to return. They couldn't explain it, but they knew deep down that whatever was behind that door had been waiting for them for generations. The curse had kept it at bay, but the door had been calling for someone to release it. And now that someone was standing right in front of it. The house grew colder still, the air thick with an oppressive energy that made it hard to breathe. Alex's pulse quickened, their mind racing with thoughts of the journal, the family history, and the dark force trapped behind the door. They had to know more. They had to understand why this was happening, why the door had begun to behave so strangely. But as they turned to leave, the whispers came again, louder now, as though the house itself were alive with voices from the past. The curse, the blood. Alex froze, a chill running down their spine. The door had become more than just an object. It was a gateway to something ancient, something that would stop at nothing to escape. And now it was calling for them. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that the door was alive. The house, once familiar and comforting, had turned into a maze of unease. Every corner seemed to harbor a whisper. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a warning. The door, though, was the most insistent of all. Its pull had grown stronger, its eerie glow more pronounced, its presence impossible to ignore. But Alex's family, blissfully unaware of the door's dark grip, continued to brush off the unsettling events. For days, Alex had been poring over the old journal, every word twisting tighter around them. The door's history, its curse, its malevolent presence, it all felt so real, so close, yet no one seemed to care. No one else could hear the whispers or feel the cold drafts that cut through the house at night. They all insisted that it was just the house settling, just Alex's overactive imagination. But Alex knew better. Every night the door seemed to get closer to opening, though it refused to fully reveal what was behind it. At times, Alex swore they saw shadows moving within the crack, or felt the brush of cold air seeping from under it. Yet each morning it was as if the door had been untouched, locked in a silent mockery of their fear. One evening over dinner, Alex's cousin Sarah brought up the topic of the door with an air of casual dismissal. "You're still obsessing over that thing?" she asked, her voice thick with a tone that made Alex feel like they were a child again. "It's just a door. Alex, you've always been dramatic. I don't see why it's such a big deal." Alex's fork scraped against the plate, their appetite suddenly gone. "It's not just a door, Sarah. But they stopped, realizing that trying to explain it to her was pointless. How could they make her understand? How could they make anyone understand the sinister things they'd experienced? Their uncle Tom, who had been unusually quiet, piped up from the other end of the table. "Alex, maybe you're just stressed. It's Christmas, everyone's running around, and you're cooped up in here thinking too much about that damn door. It's an old relic, nothing more." His tone was firm, but there was something off about his eyes, something distant, almost fearful. It made Alex pause, but only for a moment. "I'm telling you, something's not right," Alex insisted, their voice rising despite their best efforts. "That door, it's not just old wood. There's something behind it, something terrible, and I think it's trying to get out." The table fell silent. Sarah exchanged a look with her mother, who shook her head, her face contorting in a mixture of disbelief and frustration. Alex's Aunt Lily, who had always been the more practical one in the family, set her fork down and spoke in a calm but firm voice. "Alex, we're all worried about you. These things you're describing, these visions, are not real. This house is just old, and you're letting your imagination run wild." But Alex wasn't listening. They couldn't. They could feel the doors pull in their chest, a constant, nagging pressure that threatened to suffocate them. The more their family dismissed it, the more it seemed to grow in power. Alex's own anxiety, already fraying at the edges, began to multiply. But it wasn't just their mind that was unraveling. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house shifted. It wasn't just Alex who seemed affected by the strange happenings. The entire household seemed to be at the mercy of some unseen force. Small things began to happen, unsettling shifts in behavior that were hard to ignore. Sarah, usually the bubbly one, had become moody and withdrawn. Her once lively conversations now consisted of short, sharp exchanges. She snapped at Alex over trivial things, her temper flaring up for no reason. But it wasn't just Sarah. Alex's uncle Tom had become unusually agitated, his patience wearing thin. At one point, Alex caught him muttering angrily to himself as he paced the living room, a scowl twisting his features. It was like a cloud had settled over him, something dark and heavy that made him almost unrecognizable. Lily, who had always been the stabilizing force in the family, started having long, whispered conversations with herself, or perhaps with someone else. Alex wasn't sure. Her mood swings were growing erratic, and Alex could see her eyes darting around the house in a way that made them uneasy. The house was suffocating under the weight of all the tension, and Alex could feel it pressing in on them, filling the spaces with a palpable, invisible dread. The once cozy, safe home had become a battleground, each person succumbing to a sense of unease that none of them could explain. Everyone seemed to be on edge, and Alex couldn't help but wonder, was it the house? Was it the door? Or was something darker at play? That night, Alex found themselves lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The whispering had returned, louder now, more insistent. The words were jumbled, unintelligible, but the tone was unmistakable. There was anger in them, an ancient rage that pulsed through the air like a warning. A sudden crash from downstairs startled them, making their heart leap into their throat. Alex rushed downstairs, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty hall. As they reached the bottom, they saw their aunt standing in the doorway of the living room, staring at something in the distance. Her eyes were wide, her mouth slightly open in shock. "What's going on?" Alex demanded, their voice trembling. Lily didn't respond at first, just continued to stare blankly into the dark room. Finally, she turned to face Alex, her face pale. I thought I heard something. A voice." Alex's stomach sank. "What do you mean, a voice?" "I don't know," she whispered, her voice trembling. It was so faint, like a whisper, but I couldn't make out the words. Alex's mind raced. This was the door. It had to be. They weren't the only ones hearing things. The house was alive with voices, shadows, and the creeping sensation that something was about to break free. "I'm telling you, Aunt Lily," Alex said urgently, "we have to do something about that door. It's not just in my head. It's real." But Lily shook her head, her eyes filled with the same fear that had been growing in Alex for days. "We've been through this already. It's nothing. Just go to bed, Alex." But Alex couldn't. They couldn't sleep, couldn't rest with the weight of the door pressing on them. They were being pulled into something much darker, something that their family refused to acknowledge. They were the only one who could see it for what it was. And as the family tried to ignore the door's power, Alex knew they couldn't ignore it any longer. The door was calling to them, and they would have to face whatever lay behind it before it consumed them all. The night was cold, the air heavy with a stillness that seemed to press down on the house like a thick, suffocating blanket. The usual creaks and groans of the old structure had quieted, as if even the house itself was holding its breath. Alex lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Their mind raced, a whirlpool of images and emotions that they couldn't escape. The door, the strange symbols, the growing sense of something or someone watching them. They were drowning in their own paranoia, unable to find solace even in sleep. And then, it happened. A faint rustling sound reached Alex's ears, pulling them out of their thoughts. It was soft at first, like the sound of paper crinkling or a whisper brushing against the walls. The noise grew louder, more distinct, until Alex couldn't ignore it any longer. It was coming from downstairs. A chill ran through their spine and Alex froze. They had heard noises before, whispers in the dark, faint sounds that couldn't quite be explained. But this was different. This wasn't just the house settling or the wind outside. It felt intentional. The air itself seemed to hum with an energy that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. Unable to resist the pull of curiosity, Alex threw off the covers and slipped out of bed, their feet cold against the hardwood floor. The darkness of the hallway enveloped them as they crept toward the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last, the sound of their breathing the only thing keeping them company in the quiet house. When Alex reached the bottom of the stairs, they hesitated. The living room was bathed in a ghostly moonlight, casting long, twisting shadows across the room. The door at the far end stood slightly ajar, just as it had every night for the past few weeks. But tonight was different. Tonight there was something about the door that seemed to pulse as though it was alive. Alex's heart raced, their palms slick with sweat. They approached the door slowly, drawn to it by an unseen force, their feet barely making a sound on the floor. The rustling had stopped, but the air still felt thick with tension. As they drew closer, the door creaked, as if it were beckoning them closer. And then, from the corner of their eye, Alex saw it. A shadow, tall and twisted, stepped out from behind the door, moving with an unnatural fluidity. It was no more than a silhouette at first, but as it took shape, Alex could make out the outline of a figure, a tall, lean form draped in darkness, with features that were impossible to discern. It wasn't human. Not entirely. Alex's breath caught in their throat, their body frozen in place. The figure seemed to notice them, turning its head slowly, and Alex's blood ran cold as they locked eyes with it. The creature's eyes were hollow, black voids that seemed to swallow the light around them. There was no face, no expression, just an overwhelming presence that filled the room with an oppressive, suffocating aura. The shadow took a step forward, and Alex's heart hammered in their chest. It didn't move like a person. It glided, shifting through the air with an eerie smoothness, as though it were made of smoke or shadow itself. The air around it grew colder, the temperature dropping so sharply that Alex could see their breath misting in the air. The figure extended one long, spindly arm toward Alex, its fingers thin and elongated like a spider's legs. It beckoned them forward, its hand rising and falling in a slow, deliberate motion. The invitation was clear. Open the door. Come closer. Alex's body trembled, caught between fear and fascination. Everything inside them screamed to run, to escape, to get as far away from the door as possible. But they couldn't. They were rooted to the spot. as if some invisible force held them there, compelling them to take a step closer. "Don't." The word came out as a whisper, barely audible over the pounding of their heart. "Don't do this." The figure seemed to pause, as though considering their words, and then its other hand reached out, extending toward them with unnatural grace. It wasn't just an invitation anymore, it was a demand. A pulse of icy dread surged through Alex's chest, and the force holding them in place shattered. They stumbled backward, heart racing, blood pounding in their ears. The shadow flickered, its form distorting like smoke caught in the wind, before it faded back into the crack of the door, vanishing from sight, as if it had never been there at all. Alex stood frozen for a moment, their minds struggling to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Their breathing came in shallow gasps, and their legs trembled, threatening to give way beneath them. They wanted to run, to flee the house entirely, but they couldn't. They were paralyzed by the terror of the encounter, unable to make sense of what had just happened. But even as the figure disappeared, the room didn't return to normal. The air was still heavy with the same oppressive chill, and the door remained ajar, waiting. Alex turned quickly, unable to stay in the room for another second. They rushed back up the stairs, their feet stumbling in their haste, and slammed the door shut behind them. Their heart was still racing, and their mind was a storm of confusion and fear. What had just happened? Had they imagined it? Had it been some kind of hallucination? But no. The coldness in the air, the sense of being watched, those were real. They were tangible. Alex's skin still tingled with the lingering sensation of the figure's presence. And then came the sounds. So. At first, it was just a whisper, faint and distant. But as the minutes passed, the whisper grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't coming from outside the room. It wasn't the wind or the house settling. It was coming from behind the walls, from within the house itself. The scratching sound, like something clawing at the plaster, echoed in the silence. It was soft at first, almost like the rustling of leaves, but soon it grew louder, more frantic. The walls seemed to pulse with each scrape, as if something was trying to break free, trying to get out. Alex's blood ran cold. The whispers grew louder, clearer, and Alex could hear voices, faint but unmistakable, speaking in a language they couldn't understand. It was as though the house itself was alive, and the shadow they had seen was just a small part of something far more ancient, far more powerful. Alex fell back onto their bed, their body racked with cold sweat. The voices seemed to close in on them, surrounding them with their unintelligible words, their eerie whispers. The scratching from the walls continued, relentless, as if the house itself was trying to tear itself apart. And all the while, the door remained open, a silent invitation to whatever lay beyond. The door was waiting, and it wasn't done with Alex yet. The days seemed to blend together as Alex's obsession with the door deepened. Each passing hour only strengthened their desire to unlock the mystery that had haunted the family home for generations. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was indeed a hunger that gnawed at them from the inside. The strange occurrences, the shadows, the whispers, they had become a constant in Alex's life, and they couldn't stop thinking about them. Each night, Alex would return to the door, drawn to it like a moth to a flame, their mind racing with thoughts of what lay behind it. But the more they learned, the more they realized that the door's power wasn't just a trick of the light or a figment of imagination. It was real, and it had been real for a long time. Ignoring the growing concern from their family, Alex continued to research, to delve deeper into the dark history of the house. The old family records, dusty and neglected, seemed to hold more secrets than answers. It was in one of these records that Alex first stumbled upon the tragic accounts of those who had come before them. The story was always the same. Generations of family members had tried to open the door. Some had been curious, others desperate, but all had failed. The result was the same: tragedy. There were reports of unexplained disappearances, sudden illnesses, and even violent deaths. A great-uncle who had been a well-respected historian had vanished without a trace the night he attempted to unlock the door. Another relative, a young woman, had become so obsessed with the door that she'd locked herself in front of it for days, only to be found in a catatonic state, her eyes wide open, staring at the door as if expecting it to speak. She never spoke again. The more Alex read, the more they could feel the pull of the door intensifying. It wasn't just a door anymore, it was a force that had left a trail of destruction behind it. Each page in the family history seemed to echo a warning: do not open it. But Alex couldn't stop themselves. They had to know. They had to understand what was behind it. The door had become an obsession, a puzzle they couldn't ignore, and each new detail they uncovered only served to fuel their desire to open it. Their obsession didn't go unnoticed. Family members began to worry, trying to intervene, but their concerns only seemed to make Alex more resolute. They had tried to be patient at first, tried to reason with them, but now they were growing frantic. "Alex, this isn't healthy," their mother said one evening, her voice tinged with fear. "You're changing. You're not the same. You're letting it control you." "I'm fine," Alex replied, though the words felt hollow in their mouth. "I just need to understand. It's important." But their mother shook her head, her face pale with worry. "We've always known about the door, but we learned long ago that it's better to leave it alone. Your great-grandfather nearly went mad trying to open it, and your uncle, he's gone because of it. Please, Alex, don't let it take you too." Alex felt a pang of guilt, but it quickly faded as the allure of the door called them back. Their family didn't understand. They couldn't possibly understand what it was like to feel the pull, to know that something dark was waiting behind that door. It wasn't just curiosity, it was destiny, as if they were the one chosen to unlock whatever secret lay beyond. The door was waiting for them, and they would not back down. That night, Alex found themselves standing before the door once more. The house was eerily silent, the usual creaks and groans of the old wood muted in the stillness. There was a chill in the air, a feeling of expectancy that made Alex's skin crawl. The door was slightly ajar again, just as it had been for weeks, its surface smooth and unyielding. It hadn't budged, but it was as if the door itself was watching them. Alex's eyes narrowed as they stared at the door, and for the first time they noticed something new. A faint, glowing pattern had appeared around the edges of the doorframe, shimmering softly in the dim light. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Alex's pulse quickened. The marks, the symbols, they were more intricate now, almost like a warning, or perhaps an invitation. A gust of wind suddenly swept through the room, carrying with it a faint, barely audible whisper. It wasn't words, not exactly. It was a feeling, a sensation, like something brushing against Alex's mind, like a hand grazing their thoughts. "Open it. It." The voice was not from a person. It was deep, echoing, as though it came from the very air itself, from behind the walls, from within the house. Alex's breath caught in their throat, their hands trembling as they reached out to touch the door. But just as their fingers brushed the cool wood, something stopped them. The feeling of being watched, the sensation of something lurking just out of sight, intensified. They froze, heart racing, and slowly turned their head. In the corner of the room, standing just beyond the edge of the doorframe, was a figure. It was a shadow, a dark shape that didn't belong. Alex could only see it out of the corner of their eye, but it was there, standing perfectly still, watching them. They tried to focus, but the figure disappeared the moment they turned their head. Their vision blurred, as if the image was too quick, too fleeting to hold on to. A sudden coldness flooded the room, the temperature plummeting as if the very air around them had been sucked out. Alex's breath turned to mist, their pulse quickening. They felt someone moving just behind them. There was no sound, no footsteps, just the sensation of a presence, a heavy, malevolent force that filled the space. A figure appeared again, this time clearer. A person standing right in front of the door. They were tall, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, their face hidden in shadow. They didn't move, didn't speak, but Alex could feel their gaze, cold and empty, boring into their soul. "You shouldn't be here." The words were not spoken aloud. They entered Alex's mind like a thought, like an invasion. The figure took a step forward, and Alex felt their heart pound in their chest. The air around them grew thicker, heavier, suffocating them. Alex couldn't breathe. They couldn't move. The figure stepped closer, its presence overwhelming. And then, with a sudden flash, the figure was gone, leaving only the sound of their own ragged breathing and the oppressive silence of the room. For a moment Alex stood frozen, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The figure, what had it been? Was it real? Or was it just another hallucination? Another fragment of their growing obsession? But even as they asked themselves these questions, Alex knew the truth. They were no longer in control. The door, the house, the darkness, it was taking them somewhere. Slowly, surely it was pulling them in. And no matter how much they resisted, it was too late. There was no turning back now. The obsession had taken root, and it was growing stronger every day. The door was calling them, and Alex could no longer fight the pull. The weight of the house seemed to grow heavier with each passing day, the air thick with a sense of impending doom that Alex could no longer ignore. The spirits, once only faint whispers in the dark, had become more insistent, more tangible. It was no longer just the flicker of shadows or the chill that ran down their spine. The spirits were speaking directly to Alex now, their voices like the wind, faint at first, but unmistakable and unyielding. Every night, as the house settled into silence, the whispers would start. At first they were almost imperceptible, the rustle of leaves in a far-off storm. But over time they grew louder, more distinct. Alex would hear them in the corners of the room, just out of sight, like a conversation happening behind closed doors. The words were always fragmented, cryptic, tantalizing snippets of something far larger, something deeper. One night, as Alex stood before the door again, the air felt different. Charged. The usual unease in the house had turned into something far darker, more alive. The whispers came from everywhere at once, swirling around Alex like a storm. "Do you hear us?" A voice rasped, distant yet urgent. Alex stiffened, their pulse quickening as they looked around the empty room. The shadows seemed to stretch toward them, reaching from every corner. "We are here," the voice continued, clearer now, and though it had no shape, no discernible source, Alex felt it deep inside their chest, vibrating against their ribs. "You must listen. The truth lies beyond the door." Alex's heart raced. The voice was unlike anything they had heard before, ancient, pained, as if it carried the weight of countless lifetimes. It was not just one spirit speaking, but a chorus of them, all desperate, all trying to reach Alex. They had always known the house was different, but now it was undeniable. These spirits, they were trapped, and they were trying to communicate. Suddenly, the voice took on a more familiar tone, one that sent chills running down Alex's spine. A shadow, dark and imposing, flickered at the edge of their vision, its form barely perceptible. It stepped forward, taking shape in the dim light, and Alex gasped. The figure was a woman, pale, her features sharp, her hair wild, yet there was something hauntingly familiar about her. "Alex," she whispered, her voice crackling like dry leaves. "You are connected to this place. You always have been." Alex stepped back, their legs trembling. The woman's presence was overwhelming, suffocating. She didn't look like anyone Alex had ever known, yet something about her made their skin crawl with recognition. "What do you mean?" Alex asked, their voice trembling despite their best efforts to sound calm. The woman's lips curled into a sorrowful smile. "Your bloodline is intertwined with the curse. The door is no accident, Alex. It is part of you, and you are part of it." Alex took a step back, horrified by the words. "What do you mean, part of it? I don't understand." The spirit's eyes, dark and hollow, locked onto Alex's, her gaze penetrating as though she could see into their very soul. "The door was made to protect, but it is also a prison," she continued. "A prison for what lies beyond. A prison for something ancient and malevolent. And you, Alex, you are the key." The weight of her words hit Alex like a physical blow. A prison, a key. They could feel their heartbeat quicken, panic rising in their chest. Their mind raced, the fragments of truth the spirits had whispered now beginning to piece together, though they still didn't understand. Before Alex could speak, the figure vanished in a ripple of shadow, leaving only an oppressive silence in its wake. But the whispers continued. More voices joined in, each one pulling at the edges of Alex's consciousness, making the walls close in around them. "We are lost, trapped by the door," one spirit sobbed. "We wait for the one who can open it," another murmured, its voice filled with longing. Alex stumbled backward, unable to shake the sense of dread that had taken root in their chest. They could feel the spirits all around them, surrounding them, trying to make contact. Yet even in their desperation, Alex was filled with a cold, gnawing fear. The truth was out there, but it was elusive, just beyond their reach. That night, as the whispers continued, Alex could feel something shifting in the air. The house was alive with a presence they couldn't ignore. The walls seemed to hum with energy, a strange vibration that made the air feel thick and charged. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Alex, a new voice broke through the others. It was different, calmer, but more insistent. The truth is hidden. You must uncover it. The voice was oddly soothing, though it still carried a sense of urgency that could not be ignored. Alex followed the sound, moving instinctively toward the source of the voice. They felt drawn to the corner of the room, where the shadows seemed to move and shift, alive with a presence they could almost touch. As they reached the corner, something in the air shifted. The temperature dropped, and the whispers became clearer, more distinct. "Look," the voice urged. Alex's eyes darted to the floor. A faint pattern was visible, barely noticeable at first, hidden beneath the dust and debris of years. It was an intricate design, circular, with runes that seemed to pulse with energy. The same runes they had seen around the door. They knelt down, trembling, and began to trace the edges of the pattern with their fingers. The moment they touched the first rune, the house seemed to come alive. The temperature dropped even further, and the floor beneath them groaned, as if the very foundation of the house was shifting. The air became thick, suffocating, and Alex's breath caught in their throat. "Be careful," the voice warned again, its tone urgent. "The truth is dangerous, but it is the only way." With a deep breath, Alex focused, their heart hammering in their chest. The room seemed to spin around them, the walls closing in as the whispers of the spirits grew louder, merging into a cacophony of voices. They could hear fragments of old memories, of voices long gone. But the truth was still elusive, just beyond their grasp. As Alex traced the final rune, the floor beneath them cracked open with a deafening sound. A burst of energy shot through the air, and the spirits screamed, their voices rising in a chaotic crescendo. In that moment, Alex saw something in the distance, something dark and incomprehensible, an image that burned itself into their mind. The image vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Alex gasping for air, drenched in sweat. The room was still again. The whispers faded, but the house felt different. Alex stood in the silence, their heart racing, a new sense of dread settling in their chest. The spirits were no longer just voices, they were here in the house, pressing against them, urging them to open the door. But something deeper, darker, had begun to stir, and Alex knew that whatever lay behind the door was no longer just a mystery. It was a threat. The spirits were no longer just trapped. They were calling to Alex, urging them to finish what had been started. And now Alex knew that they had no choice. The door would be opened, and whatever was behind it would change everything. The night had come. A heavy silence blanketed the house, thicker than it had ever been before. Every corner, every shadow seemed to hold its breath, as if the entire house was waiting for Alex to act, for the inevitable confrontation to unfold. Alex stood before the door, hands shaking but resolve burning in their chest. The whispers were louder now, almost frantic, swirling in their mind, urging them onward. "Open it," they pleaded, their voices a haunting chorus. "You are the key. You must unlock the truth." The door, so familiar, yet so alien, loomed before them, covered in dust and old, forgotten marks. It pulsed faintly with energy, an otherworldly glow that seemed to beckon Alex closer. For weeks they had feared this moment, haunted by the whispers of the spirits and the mounting unease that had consumed the house. But now there was no turning back. The spirits had made it clear this was the only path forward. With a deep breath, Alex reached for the doorknob, their fingers cold and unsteady. The moment their hand made contact, the temperature in the room dropped drastically. It was as if the very air had turned to ice, sending a chill down their spine. Their heart hammered in their chest as a low hum filled the room, growing louder, vibrating in the air around them. Suddenly, a force surged through the house, a violent, uncontrollable burst of energy. Alex staggered back, their body thrown against the wall by an invisible force. The room was filled with an eerie hum, like the sound of a distant storm that rattled the very foundation of the house. The lights flickered, dimmed, and then flickered again, casting strange, warped shadows across the walls. The air itself seemed to tremble, charged with an unearthly power. Objects around them began to levitate, chairs, books, picture frames all rising into the air, hovering like weightless specters. Alex's breath came in ragged gasps as the room twisted into chaos. The house groaned, its wooden beams creaking under the strain of the supernatural force that had been unleashed. The walls seemed to close in, pressing against Alex as though the house itself was alive, hungry for something. Alex, the spirits whispered in unison, their voices sharp and shrill, carried on the waves of energy. "Open it, you must open it." With a cry, Alex pushed forward, gripping the doorknob with a mixture of fear and determination. The moment their fingers closed around it, the room seemed to explode with power. The temperature plummeted to near freezing, the air thick with an oppressive, suffocating force that threatened to crush them. The door creaked a sound so low, so deep it reverberated through Alex's bones. Then, with a violent jolt, the door swung open. For a moment there was nothing but darkness, a void so absolute it swallowed every bit of light, every shred of hope. Alex squinted into the blackness, trying to make sense of the scene beyond. But there was nothing, only darkness stretching endlessly, as if the door had opened to a place beyond time, beyond reality. Then, slowly, Alex's senses began to pick up on the subtle horrors lurking within. At the very edges of the void there were shapes, dark, shifting forms that seemed to move just beyond the periphery of their vision. They were barely discernible shadows that flitted in and out of the mist, their presence more felt than seen. The hairs on the back of Alex's neck stood on end as the atmosphere around them thickened with an unseen, malevolent presence. A gust of cold air rushed out from the door, carrying with it the faintest scent of decay, something ancient and foul. Alex could feel the pull, the oppressive weight of the void calling to them, tugging at their very soul, urging them to step inside. The shadows in the distance seemed to beckon, their forms coalescing into shapes too strange to describe, too alien to comprehend. "No, don't go in," a part of Alex screamed, but it was drowned out by the overwhelming force pulling them closer. The door had opened, and now it was as if everything in the world, everything in the house had been waiting for this moment. The spirits, those trapped in the house, those ancient souls were no longer silent. They whispered, they begged, they warned. "You are the key," the voice of the woman, the one who had spoken to Alex before, echoed in their mind, her tone desperate. "You must come. You must face what lies within." Alex's pulse thundered in their ears as they took a step forward, their legs trembling with fear. The shadows shifted again and the fog thickened, swirling like an endless abyss that stretched out forever. There was no floor beneath them, no sky above, just the consuming dark that reached out to engulf them. For a moment Alex hesitated. The chill of the air, the weight of the shadows, the voices, the overwhelming sense of doom, it was all too much. But then, through the darkness, they saw something, a faint, glowing shape, far in the distance. It was beckoning them forward, as if it knew who Alex was, as if it had been waiting for them all along. The shadows grew louder, the whispers more urgent. Alex could feel their heart racing, the terror creeping up their spine. Every instinct screamed at them to run, to close the door, to turn away from the darkness that was pulling them in. But the voice of the spirit was louder now, more insistent. "You have no choice," it urged. "The door must be opened. You are the one who must face the darkness." With one final, trembling step, Alex crossed the threshold. As they did, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang, sealing off any escape. The shadows closed in from all sides, the fog swirling like a storm around them. The temperature dropped to unbearable levels, and Alex could feel the weight of the void pressing down on them, suffocating them. And then, from the blackness, something moved. A shape, vast and terrible, emerged from the depths of the fog. It was no longer just the whispers of spirits, it was real, tangible. A figure that defied all understanding, made of darkness, of mist, of something far worse than anything Alex had imagined. It loomed over them, its presence so overwhelming that it stole the very air from their lungs. Alex could barely breathe as the figure drew closer, its form shifting, changing, as though it were not quite a thing of this world. The shadows twisted around it, a swirling mass of tendrils that reached out to grab Alex, pulling them closer into the dark abyss. In that moment, Alex realized the truth. The door had never been just a doorway. It had been a prison, yes, but it was also a passage. A passage to something ancient, something evil. And now it was free. And Alex was trapped. Alex's heart raced, a relentless thrum that seemed to echo through the very walls of the house. The air had grown heavier, suffused with an oppressive weight that clung to every corner, every shadow. The door, the once inconspicuous, dusty fixture, now stood as an undeniable presence, a gateway to something far beyond their comprehension. The house, which had once been a place of warmth and memories, now felt alien, its very structure pulsating with an unholy energy. For the first time, Alex could no longer dismiss the growing sense of dread that had been creeping under their skin for weeks. Wasn't just the whispers the ones that haunted their every waking moment. It wasn't just the flickering lights, the strange shadows darting in their peripheral vision, or the cold drafts that seemed to come from nowhere. No, this was something deeper, more sinister. It was as if the house itself was alive, watching them, waiting for something. The moment they crossed the threshold of the door, everything had changed. And now, in the aftermath of the eerie encounter, Alex was beginning to piece together the horrifying truth. The house was tied to the door. The door wasn't just an object, it was a conduit, a vessel holding something ancient and powerful. And that power was growing stronger. The house groaned, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to come from the very foundations, vibrating through the floors and walls. Alex felt it in their bones, a subtle tremor that ran through the house like a warning. Their breath came out in short gasps, the chill of the air settling into their lungs like ice. It was then that Alex felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. The hairs on the back of their neck prickled, and a cold shiver ran down their spine. Turning quickly, Alex scanned the room. The hallway was empty, but the feeling lingered. A presence. Something or someone was close. It wasn't just their imagination. The house had changed. The walls were no longer familiar. They seemed to close in around Alex, shifting, distorting, as if the house itself had grown aware of them. The strange marks on the door seemed to shift in the flickering light, their form changing, as though they were alive in a way that defied logic and reason. But it wasn't just the house. It was everywhere. The whispers had grown louder, a chorus of voices that filled the air like a swarm of insects. Alex could no longer ignore them, could no longer pretend that they were simply echoes of the past, remnants of a history forgotten. No, these whispers were alive. They were part of the house, part of the door. Alex, a voice called, soft but insistent. The voice of the woman, the one who had warned them. Her voice trembled with fear, a sharp contrast to the cold, unfeeling presence that surrounded them. "You must understand," the voice continued, its tone urgent. "The door, the house, it's a prison. And you are the key." The words sent a jolt through Alex, a wave of icy terror washing over them. What did it mean? A prison? A key? The pieces began to fall into place, but with them came a sinking feeling, a realization that tore through Alex's mind like a blade. The door was not merely an object. It was the threshold of something far worse, something that had been locked away for centuries, trapped behind the door. Now, that thing was beginning to stir. The house groaned again, louder this time, as if in agreement. Alex's gaze darted around, their eyes landing on the door. It seemed to pulse, as though it were breathing, its dark presence growing stronger with each passing moment. "I didn't believe you," Alex whispered to the air, the words heavy with the weight of truth they didn't want to accept. They had ignored the signs, dismissed the warnings as the delusions of a mind unraveling from stress, from loss. But now, there was no denying it. The whispers grew louder, urgent, almost frantic, their meaning becoming clearer with each passing second. Alex clutched their head, the pressure building as the words filled their mind, relentless and overwhelming. "You are the key," the voice whispered again, its tone growing more insistent. "You must open it. The door must open again. You cannot stop it now." Alex stumbled backward, their heart pounding in their chest. Their mind raced. The door had opened once, and they had crossed the threshold. That much was clear. But what had they unleashed? What had they become a part of? A gust of wind slammed through the room, though the windows were shut tight. The candles flickered and extinguished, leaving the room bathed in shadows. The temperature dropped even further, the cold becoming unbearable as the walls seemed to close in, the very air thick with something that wasn't quite right. And then there it was, the sound. The faintest scrape, like nails against wood, coming from behind the walls. Alex froze, their breath caught in their throat. It was no longer a whisper, no longer a distant murmur. It was something real, something right there with them. A presence no longer a figment of their imagination. They turned toward the source of the sound, eyes wide with dread. The walls, the floors, they were shifting, pulsating with a dark energy. The sound grew louder, the scratching growing frantic, as though something trapped inside the walls was trying to break free. The air grew heavier, pressing against Alex like a weight they could not escape. Something was coming. The door was no longer just an object. It was the heart of this twisted, dark reality, a gateway to a force that had been locked away, hidden in the shadows of the house, for reasons Alex was now beginning to understand. And they were the key. They had always been the key. The house is awakening, the voice whispered again, this time sharper, more forceful. The door must open. You must open it again. Tears welled in Alex's eyes as they backed away from the door, a cold, irrational fear gripping their chest. The pressure, the urgency, the unrelenting need to understand it all was driving them to the brink. They had thought they could control it, that they could unlock the truth without paying the price. But the house had other plans. The scratching grew louder, more violent, echoing through the walls as if something was desperate to escape. Alex's heart pounded as they realized with a sickening certainty it was too late to stop it. With every breath, the weight of their decision pressed down harder. The door was calling again, urging them to return, to open it once more. But what lay beyond? What had they let loose? And could they survive the truth that would come when they finally uncovered it? Alex was trapped in the house now, not just physically, but in a way they couldn't understand. They were part of its story, its curse, its prison, and there was no turning back. The only question that remained was how far they were willing to go to uncover the secrets buried within its walls. And as the darkness crept closer, the answer was becoming terrifyingly clear. The chill in the air thickened, suffocating Alex with its icy grip. Their breath clouded in the dim light of the hallway as they stood before the door. It was no longer just a piece of the house, it had become a monument to their obsession, a symbol of the mystery that had consumed them. Every step toward it felt like an irreversible decision, but Alex could no longer resist. The whispers in the house had grown louder, more urgent, pulling them forward with a force they could neither ignore nor understand. Their hand hovered above the doorknob, trembling. It wasn't just the fear, it was the sense that something wanted them to open it, as if the door had been waiting for this moment, for them to cross its threshold. The dark, oppressive force behind it seemed to beckon, a lure stronger than any cautionary voice in their head. With a swift motion, Alex gripped the knob and turned. The door creaked open with a sound that echoed too loudly in the silent house, a noise that felt unnatural. The space beyond was hidden in shadow, and the temperature seemed to drop by several degrees in an instant. It wasn't just cold, it was a biting cold that seeped into Alex's very bones, sending an immediate shudder through their body. But there was no turning back now. Alex stepped forward, crossing the threshold into the unknown. The moment they entered, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening crash, the sound reverberating through the room. A rush of cold air filled the space, as though the very walls had exhaled. The darkness was thick, oppressive, and the air was thick with the scent of decay, old wood, and something faintly metallic. Alex's pulse raced in their ears as they blinked in the dark, their eyes slowly adjusting to the gloom. What had once been an ordinary room, something unremarkable, a forgotten part of the house, was now a place of absolute terror. The space seemed to stretch unnaturally, the walls curving in on themselves in a way that defied geometry. The air was heavier, thick with a presence that felt both ancient and malicious. The faintest movement caught Alex's eye. A shadow flitted past in the corner of the room, vanishing before they could truly focus on it. Alex's breath hitched as the silence became suffocating. Then it came the whispering. Soft at first, like a distant murmur, but growing louder, more insistent. Words impossible to make out swirled in the air around them, as if the very atmosphere was alive with the ghosts of the past. The whispers grew in intensity, like 1,000 voices begging, pleading, commanding. And then they heard it, the sound of something shifting, dragging against the floor behind them. Alex whipped around, the darkness pressing in, but there was nothing, only shadows that seemed to twist and move on their own. They felt it then, a presence. It was subtle at first, like a weight pressing down on them, a feeling of being watched that sent a shiver down their spine. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the air around them seemed to grow colder, the temperature dropping further until it was unbearable. Alex's fingers numbed from the chill, and their breath came out in short, panicked gasps. The room, no longer just a space, had become a living entity, an ominous, suffocating force. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing in time with Alex's erratic heartbeat. The whispers had grown to an unsettling intensity, overlapping and chaotic, yet somehow each word felt clear as day. They spoke of a time long forgotten, of secrets buried deep within the house, secrets that Alex wasn't sure they were ready to uncover. Suddenly, the shadows shifted again, this time much more violently. They twisted and writhed, taking on vague, terrifying shapes, figures that loomed, towering and indistinct, but with an undeniable sense of malice. Alex's eyes widened as one of the shapes moved closer, revealing a gaunt, hollowed figure, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. It raised a bony finger, pointing directly at Alex. A cold, wet breath raked across their skin, and the whispers became louder, urging Alex to understand. "You shouldn't have come," a voice rasped, cold and ancient, filled with an eerie, unnatural calm. Alex stumbled backward, eyes wide with terror. "What are you? What is this place?" They gasped, their voice trembling with fear. The figure didn't respond with words, but its presence was enough to convey its meaning. "This is where it all ends." The thought seemed to crash into Alex's mind without warning, a realization that sent their heart plummeting into their stomach. This room wasn't just a hidden space, it was a prison, a gateway, a threshold to something far darker. The house was more than a home. It was a portal. The temperature dropped even further, until Alex could no longer feel their fingers. The cold gnawed at their skin, cutting into them with a brutal, unnatural chill. The room seemed to stretch impossibly farther, the shadows growing deeper, suffocating the very air. Alex's pulse quickened as the whispers became clearer, no longer just a jumbled mess of sound. They spoke of an ancient power, bound by the door, locked away in this very room. It was the thing that had cursed the family, the house itself. It had been contained, but for how long? How long before it would break free? Suddenly, a loud crash rang out from the corner of the room, followed by a deep, guttural growl, something that was not human. Alex's eyes darted toward the source of the noise, and there, emerging from the shadows, was a dark figure, a creature. Its body twisted and deformed, its eyes burning with a malevolent light. It slithered forward, its limbs contorting unnaturally, a grotesque parody of life. The air grew dense with an oppressive energy, as if the room itself was closing in around Alex, suffocating them. The whispers intensified, becoming frantic. They warned of what was coming, of the horror that had been contained for so long. It was awakening. Alex staggered backward, panic clawing at their chest. They turned toward the door, but it was no use. The door was gone, the space had become a vast, endless void, stretching out before them, an abyss from which there would be no escape. A rush of cold air slammed into Alex, and the ground beneath them seemed to shift. The shadows swirled, and the figure, the creature, was almost upon them. Its presence, its eyes, filled Alex with an unrelenting terror. In that moment, Alex realized the full extent of their mistake. The door had never been a simple doorway, it was a seal, a barrier that had kept this from the world. And now the door had opened, and there was no turning back. The air in the room was heavy with dread, pressing against Alex's chest with each shallow breath they took. Every instinct told them to turn back, to find the door and leave the cursed space behind. But something deeper, Something darker pulled them forward, urging them to seek answers. The shadows that lurked in the corners of the room seemed to mock their every move, swirling like smoke and drawing closer with every step Alex took. Despite the overwhelming sense of danger, Alex was determined to uncover the truth. If the door had been opened, it was no longer just a matter of curiosity, it was survival. They had to understand what they were up against, what had been unleashed, what had been contained for so long. There was an old, creaky wooden desk in the center of the room, covered in dust and cobwebs. On it sat a series of faded leather-bound journals and yellowed letters, scattered like abandoned relics of a past long forgotten. Each one seemed to hum with a dark energy, as if the mere act of touching them would invoke something sinister. Alex hesitated, but the pull of the unknown was too strong. Their fingers trembled as they reached for the nearest journal. The pages were brittle, their edges curled and cracked with age, but the writing was legible, scrawled in a hurried, almost frantic hand. As Alex began to read, the truth began to unfurl like a twisted tapestry. The first few pages were filled with mundane entries, everyday life from a time long past. But as the entries grew more detailed, they revealed something far more sinister. The writer and ancestor of Alex's, someone whose name had been lost to time, wrote about the construction of the very house they now stood in. The family had built it, they learned, atop an ancient burial ground, unknowingly sealing away something malevolent. The door was not just a piece of architecture, it was part of a ritual, an ancient seal, designed to keep something at bay. The ancestors' writings hinted at a dark pact made long ago, a desperate measure taken to prevent a curse from spreading further. The door had been created to imprison whatever evil had been unleashed, an evil that now stirred restlessly behind it. As Alex turned the pages, the entries grew more urgent, more desperate. The family had known, or at least suspected, that something terrible lay behind the door, but they had never been able to open it. They had tried, yes, but every attempt ended in failure. Some had been driven mad by the door's power, others simply vanished, never to be heard from again. One entry in particular stood out. It was written in a rushed, jagged hand, the ink smeared as though the writer had been trembling. It read, "The door is not just a barrier. It is a key to a realm beyond our own. We did not open it, and we must never, ever open it. If it is opened, the curse will spread. It will consume us all." Alex's heart skipped a beat. The curse wasn't just confined to the house, it had the power to spread, to destroy everything in its wake. The door had been built not just as a lock, but as a trap. Whoever opened it would become a part of its twisted game, tethered to the darkness that had been sealed away. The more Alex read, the more the atmosphere around them seemed to shift. The whispers that had once been distant now seemed to narrow, press in on them from all sides. They were no longer faint murmurs, they were sharp, frantic voices, all talking at once, overlapping in a maddening cacophony. The room felt like it was closing in on them, the shadows thickening, the air growing suffocating. Alex snapped the journal shut and stumbled back, gasping for air. But even as they tried to make sense of what they had just read, the supernatural disturbances grew more intense. The shadows shifted in ways that defied reason. The temperature dropped even further, frost creeping along the edges of the walls. Something or someone was moving behind them. Spinning around, Alex's eyes landed on a small wooden box tucked in the far corner of the room. It was a simple thing, unremarkable, but there was something about it that felt important, as if it were the last piece of the puzzle. Their heart raced as they approached it, their hand trembling as they lifted the lid. Inside was a single piece of parchment, old and stained with age, but still legible. It was another letter, this one much older than the journal, written in a language Alex couldn't immediately recognize. As they read, the cryptic words began to make sense, the symbols and letters shifting into a language that felt both alien and familiar. It spoke of a ritual, a warning about the door, and a final plea for salvation. If you open the door, you will release it, what was once bound, what was once held away from this world. The house will burn. The world will burn, and you will be the one to carry the curse. Alex felt a cold wave of dread wash over them. This was no ordinary family heirloom. It was a warning, a final plea from those who had tried to contain the darkness. And now, that darkness was loose. The room seemed to pulse around them, the whispers louder now, frantic, like they were pleading for help or trying to warn Alex of something worse yet to come. The shadows danced, their shapes distorting into grotesque figures, their eyes glowing with hunger. In that moment, Alex understood the full horror of their situation. They had unleashed something that had been trapped for centuries. The door, once a simple piece of the house, was now a portal, one that had unlocked a hellish force beyond comprehension. The family, the house, and the very air around Alex seemed to be suffocating under the weight of this knowledge. They had unknowingly triggered a dangerous chain of events, and there would be no turning back. Alex's hands shook as they held the journal and the letter, their mind racing with the knowledge that they were tied to this curse, this fate, and that the only way to stop it was to face what lay beyond the door. But the question remained, was it too late? The whispers grew louder, louder still, until they were deafening, shaking the very foundation of the house. Shadows closed in, and Alex could feel the presence growing stronger, pushing against them. The door had been opened. The curse had been triggered, and the world would never be the same again. The darkness in the room thickened, pulling the light from the air as if it were being consumed by an insatiable hunger. Every corner seemed to fold in on itself, as if the shadows themselves were conspiring against Alex, drawing closer, crowding out the walls, the floor, and the ceiling. The very air felt alive, heavy with the oppressive weight of something ancient and malevolent, something that had been hidden away for far too long. Alex stood frozen, heart pounding, as they watched the shadows stretch and twist, their forms distorting and stretching unnaturally. The whispers, once faint and distant, now felt like a constant presence in their mind. They were everywhere. They were inside their head. Their blood ran cold as they realized they were no longer alone. The temperature plummeted even further, the chill gnawing at Alex's bones. A soft, scraping sound echoed from behind them, followed by the unmistakable sound of something or someone moving in the dark. Alex spun around, but there was nothing there, only the thick shadows and the suffocating cold. And then it spoke. A low, guttural voice, like a whisper from the depths of the earth, slithered through the air. "You think you've uncovered the truth, little one. You've only scratched the surface. This house, this door, it was never meant for you to understand. It was never meant for anyone to open." The voice sent a shiver through Alex, like 1,000 icy fingers trailing down their spine. The shadows grew thicker, coiling and writhing, taking shape. A form began to emerge from the darkness, tall and twisted, its features hidden in the thick blackness that surrounded it. It moved with a fluidity that defied reason, as if it were both part of the shadows and yet separate from them. Its presence was suffocating, overpowering, like an enormous weight pressing down on Alex's chest. The figure took shape, a looming silhouette, its face hidden by a hood of darkness. It moved closer, and as it did, the shadows recoiled around it like an extension of its will. The air grew heavy with an unbearable sense of dread, as if the very house itself had come alive to imprison Alex. "You shouldn't have opened the door," the entity continued, its voice rising in pitch, laced with both malice and a twisted sense of satisfaction. "You've broken the seal. You've freed me from my prison. You've given me back what was taken from me so long ago." Alex's breath quickened, their mind racing as they tried to process the situation. This thing was the curse. It was the entity that had been locked away, the malevolent force that had haunted the house for centuries, and now it had been set free. The door, the very portal they had dared to open, had been the prison, and Alex had unwittingly released it. "You have no idea what you've done," the figure hissed, its voice growing colder, sharper. "I have waited for so long. I have watched as generations of your family suffered, trying to contain me, to keep me locked away. But now I am free, and you are the one who will suffer for it." A surge of coldness washed over Alex as they felt the full weight of the entity's presence. It was like a dark fog closing in, suffocating them. The air grew thick with malevolent energy, a swirling mass of power that threatened to crush Alex under its intensity. Every instinct screamed at them to run, to escape. But their feet felt rooted to the spot, as though the shadows themselves had taken hold of them. I was once human, the figure continued, its voice now rich with a twisted reverence. But that was long ago, before I was cursed, before I was bound to this place. I was a being of power, of knowledge, but I became too much, too dangerous. And so they sealed me away in this house behind this door. For centuries I have waited, watching, whispering to those who would listen. And now at last you've come. You've opened the door. You've set me free. Alex felt the pressure in the room increase, as if the very walls were closing in around them. The shadows seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with each word the entity spoke. The temperature dropped even lower, and Alex could see their breath fogging in the air, a visible sign of the growing chill. The entity's power was rising, and they could feel it, like an electric charge in the air. "What do you want from me?" Alex managed to ask, their voice barely a whisper, lost in the sea of terror that threatened to drown them. The figure paused, and for a moment, the silence was almost unbearable. Then, with a soft, mocking chuckle, it spoke again. "Your soul, your torment, your very essence will be mine, Alex. You open the door. You are the key. I will feed on your fear, your pain, until there is nothing left of you. I will claim you, just as I claimed all those who came before you. No one ever leaves this house. No one escapes me." Alex felt a sharp pang of terror deep within their chest, their heart pounding erratically as the truth of the entity's words settled in. Escape wasn't an option. It had been the entity's plan all along. It had waited, patiently, for someone like Alex to come along, someone who would open the door, break the seal, and release it. And now, Alex was its prisoner. The shadows around them surged forward, curling like tendrils of smoke, wrapping around Alex's legs, pulling them toward the figure. The temperature plunged further, and Alex's breath became ragged, each inhalation burning their lungs. The entity's presence was suffocating, overwhelming, as if it were consuming the very air. "You'll never leave," the figure said, its voice now a guttural growl, the shadows tightening around Alex's body, trapping them in place. "You are mine, and I will make you suffer, just as I suffered. You will never see the light again." Alex struggled against the shadows, fighting to break free, but it was no use. The darkness was too strong, too relentless. It was a force of nature, of ancient power, and they were powerless to stop it. A scream rose in Alex's throat, but before it could escape, the shadows enveloped them completely, and the figures twisted. Malevolent laughter echoed in the darkness, filling every inch of the room. And just like that, Alex understood. There was no escape. The curse was not just a punishment, it was eternal, and they were now a part of it. As the darkness consumed them, Alex's last thought was a chilling one. The door had been the beginning of the end. Alex's world had become a shifting nightmare, a blend of half-formed memories and waking terror. It was no longer clear where reality began and where the darkness ended. The shadows, once silent and still, now moved, pulsing with a life of their own, whispering incoherent words that twisted through Alex's mind like a poison. Every inch of the room felt oppressive, as though the walls themselves were slowly closing in, shrinking the space until there was no escape. The presence of the entity was suffocating. It hung in the air like a thick fog, wrapping around Alex's body and soul, suffusing every breath with its malevolent energy. Its power was unrelenting, and it no longer only existed in the room. It was inside Alex's mind, making every thought, every memory feel tainted, like something that didn't belong. Alex could feel it slowly draining them. Their body grew weaker with each passing day. Sleep was impossible, the nightmares too vivid, too real to ever truly escape. But it wasn't just the physical toll, the mental torment was far worse. Their thoughts grew muddled, a mix of the present and something far older, something that didn't belong to them. Visions, strange and haunting, came and went without warning. Faces familiar yet unfamiliar appeared before them, only to vanish when Alex tried to focus on them. The worst of it, however, was the feeling that they were being pulled into the past. Each night, the entity's grip tightened, and with it came visions of an ancient time. The house shifted around Alex, transforming from the familiar, decrepit old structure it had become into something older, grander, and far more terrifying. The once sturdy walls cracked and groaned under the weight of time, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. Alex found themselves standing in a long-forgotten version of the house, one that was pristine, untouched by the years that had come to pass. But the sense of dread remained. Shadows clung to the corners, moving like liquid darkness. And in the midst of the shifting, haunted vision, the figure of the entity loomed, watching, waiting. This is where it all began. The voice echoed in Alex's mind, the words reverberating like a chant. This house, this door, it is all tied to me. You were always meant to be here. You were always meant to open it. Alex tried to scream, to break free from the vision, but their body refused to respond. The pull of the past was too strong. As the darkness enveloped them, they were forced to witness events they couldn't fully understand, events that happened long before their time. Yet they felt inexplicably familiar. Faces from the past, faces of ancestors they had never known, gazed back at them, their eyes hollow and full of regret. "Your bloodline is cursed," the voice whispered, carrying the weight of centuries. "You are not just a victim, you are a part of me. A part of what I have become. You opened the door, and now you are mine." The vision shifted again, and Alex found themselves standing at the foot of the very door they had once opened. But it wasn't just a door anymore, it was a portal. A gateway between worlds, between the living and the damned. They could feel the presence on the other side, could feel the weight of all the souls that had been trapped there, their cries of anguish and torment echoing in the distance. The door pulsed with a malevolent energy, calling to them, reaching for them. "You are the last piece," the entity's voice whispered in a guttural tone, a sound that made Alex's skin crawl. "You are the final key to unlocking everything. The last of your bloodline, the one who will release me completely. You are bound to this house, to this curse, and you will remain here forever." Alex's heart pounded in their chest, their breath coming in ragged gasps. They could feel the weight of the truth pressing in on them, suffocating them. They were not just a victim, they were chosen. They had always been meant to open the door, to free the entity from its prison, and now they were trapped in the nightmare they had unknowingly created. The darkness around them deepened, and the air grew thick with the scent of decay. The shadows seemed to stretch and contort, shifting in ways that defied logic. And all the while, the entity's voice continued to whisper in their mind, growing more insistent, more desperate. "You cannot fight me," it hissed. "You cannot escape what you have done. This house, this door, it is a part of you. It is a part of your bloodline. And now you will join the others, trapped in the darkness. Feeding my power, you will become me." Alex staggered, their mind reeling with the weight of the realization. The entity had been here for centuries, bound by the very house that now suffocated them. It had haunted the house, waited for someone to open the door, and now that there was no turning back. The hallucinations intensified, the boundary between past and present fading entirely. Alex was no longer standing in the familiar room of the house, but in a space that was endless, stretching out before them in all directions. There was no door, no walls, just an expanse of blackness that seemed to go on forever. And in the distance, the figure of the entity loomed, its presence growing stronger with each passing second. "You are mine now," the voice echoed, a twisted mockery of comfort. "You will never leave. You will never escape. You will never forget. You are a part of me, and I will consume you, just as I have consumed all those who came before you." Alex's legs buckled beneath them, and they fell to the ground, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the entity's power. The air was thick with suffocating darkness, and the entity's laughter echoed around them like the final nail in their coffin. In the depths of their mind, a single desperate thought lingered. What if there is no escape? What if this is the end? Day. The shadows crept closer, wrapping around them, pulling them deeper into the abyss. The truth had been laid bare. They were trapped, bound by the very blood that flowed through their veins, tied to the house, to the door, to the entity that waited in the darkness. And with that realization, Alex knew there was no way out. Alex had never felt so alone, never so powerless. The entity's dark grip on their soul was suffocating, its hold tightening with every breath they took. The shadows that once whispered in their ears now screamed, howling with fury as they wrapped around Alex's mind. They could feel the entity's presence in every corner of the house, in every shadow, every cold gust of wind. It was everywhere, and no matter how hard Alex tried to escape, it was always there waiting, watching, pulling them closer to the darkness. But Alex was not ready to give in, not yet. The ancient journals and letters Alex had discovered in the hidden room still burned in their mind, a scattered collection of fragmented information. They had learned just enough to know that this wasn't just a house. It was a prison that had been built to contain the entity. For centuries, their family had fought to keep the door closed, but as the years passed, the curse had grown stronger, feeding off the fear and despair of those who lived there. But Alex also knew that there was something in the house, something within their own bloodline, that might allow them to break free. The pages of the journal spoke of rituals ancient, forgotten rites that could sever the bond between the entity and the house. They weren't complete, and they weren't easy, but they were their only hope. The air was thick with tension as Alex stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the oppressive darkness. The shadows seemed to pulse with life, watching every movement, every breath. They could feel the entity's eyes on them, feel its cold fingers creeping toward their mind, trying to worm its way into their thoughts. The voices were louder now, clamoring in their ears, urging them to give in, to surrender. But Alex was determined. They had one chance, and one chance only. The first step was to gather the necessary items, a collection of objects the journal had described as silver coin, a vial of salt, and a piece of cloth from the old house's original foundation. Alex had already found the salt and cloth hidden beneath the floorboards in the basement, remnants from the very walls that held the entity. The coin, however, was elusive. It had to be found in the exact spot where the house's first owner had fallen, the same spot where the curse had begun. Alex remembered the spot in the farthest corner of the garden, where the earth was disturbed, the place no one had dared to touch. It was there the entity had first been bound, and it was there, Alex hoped, they could break its hold. But even as they made their way to the garden, Alex could feel the presence of the entity growing stronger. The darkness was more than just shadows, it was a living thing, a hungry thing that fed off fear, off the very act of resisting. As Alex dug into the soil, the air around them grew thick with dread, and the whispers came faster, more insistent, urging them to stop. They could hear the sounds of their family members, their voices warped and hollow, telling them to abandon the fight, to let the darkness consume them. They had to ignore it. With trembling hands, Alex unearthed the silver coin, tarnished with age but still powerful. The moment their fingers closed around it, a surge of energy, pure malice, shot through them. The ground beneath them seemed to shift, as if the house itself was alive, waking from its long slumber. The whispers intensified into screams, and the wind howled like a beast in agony. The door was calling to them, louder now, almost begging for them to open it once more. But Alex was resolute. With the coin in hand, they returned to the house, their heart pounding in their chest. The temperature had dropped again, and the shadows seemed to writhe in anticipation. The house felt like a living thing, its walls groaning under the pressure of the curse that had settled within it. Inside the house, Alex arranged the items on the floor: the coin, the salt, the cloth. The ritual had to be performed with precision, every word of the incantation spoken exactly as written in the journal. But even as they prepared, the air thickened, and the entity's voice rang out, louder than ever. "You cannot escape me," it sneered, its voice a deep, guttural growl. "You are mine, and you will remain mine. The curse cannot be broken, not by you, not by anyone." Alex's hands shook, but they forced themselves to remain calm. The journal's words had been clear: the ritual required an offering, a sacrifice that would sever the bond between the entity and the house. But the offering could not be something physical, it had to be something personal. It had to be a piece of themselves. With a deep breath, Alex made the decision. They placed the silver coin at the center of the circle, sprinkling the salt around it. Then, they cut a small incision into their palm, the blood welling up and dripping onto the cloth. It wasn't much a small offering, but it was enough to connect them to the ritual, to the power of their bloodline. As they began chanting the incantation, the shadows in the room began to writhe, and the temperature dropped even further. The air was thick with energy, dark, oppressive, and alive. The whispers turned into screams, the entity's fury radiating through the room like a tangible force. The floor beneath Alex's feet began to tremble, as if the house itself was fighting back, trying to stop the ritual. "You will never escape," the entity's voice echoed, a twisted melody of rage. "You will remain trapped in this house forever. There is no end for you. There is no salvation." But Alex didn't falter. They kept chanting, their voice steady despite the terror that gnawed at their mind. The darkness around them seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as the entity's power fought against the ritual. It was a battle, one of wills, one of strength and determination. With one final, desperate cry, Alex completed the incantation. For a moment, everything went still. The darkness receded, and the whispers stopped, leaving only the sound of Alex's ragged breathing. The temperature slowly began to rise, the oppressive weight in the air lifting just enough to give them a sense of relief. But the battle was far from over. The entity was not done yet. The silence that followed the ritual felt almost unbearable. Alex stood in the center of the room, their body trembling with exhaustion, their breath shallow from the adrenaline rush. The darkness had receded, but it was not gone. Alex could feel it lurking, watching, waiting for the moment to strike. The house was still, too still. It felt like the calm before a storm, the air thick with tension. Alex's mind raced. Had the ritual worked? Was the curse finally broken? Or was this just another trick, another false hope? For a moment, the house seemed to hold its breath. Then, out of the silence, a familiar voice whispered through the air. "Alex." The voice was soft, a gentle, familiar sound that sent a shiver down their spine. They froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. It was the voice of someone they thought was gone, someone they'd lost years ago. "Alex, it's me. I've come to help." The voice came again, stronger this time, more real. Alex's heart skipped a beat as they turned toward the source of the sound, but there was no one in the room, no one standing behind them. The shadows, once ominous, seemed to shift, swirling as if something or someone was moving within them. And then, through the darkness, a figure began to materialize. Alex's breath caught in their throat. The figure was translucent at first, as if made of smoke or mist, but as it drew closer, it became clearer, more solid. And there, standing before them, was a person they never thought they'd see again. It was their uncle, Elias. Elias had disappeared years ago, vanished without a trace. His disappearance had been a mystery that haunted their family, a shadow that lingered over the house like a curse of its own. There had been rumors, whispers about strange happenings in the house before his disappearance, about things he'd been involved in that no one dared to speak of. Some had even believed he had been taken by the very entity that now haunted the house. But here he was, standing in front of Alex, his ghostly figure bathed in a soft, ethereal glow. "Uncle Elias," Alex whispered, their voice barely audible, a mixture of disbelief and hope. "Is it really you?" Elias nodded, his expression both pained and determined. His voice, though faint, carried a weight of sorrow and knowledge. "Yes, Alex, it's me. I never left. Not really. I've been trapped, just like you." Alex stepped back, the room spinning as they tried to process what was happening. Their minds struggled to grasp the reality of the situation. Their uncle, dead or missing for so long, was here, in front of them, a spirit, a manifestation of the past. How are you here? How is this possible?" Alex stammered, their voice trembling. You were gone, Elias. We thought you were. I know, Elias interrupted, his voice steady now, his form becoming clearer, more defined. I was taken by the same force that controls this house. But I wasn't fully gone, not entirely. I've been trapped in the shadows, bound to this place by the curse, watching, waiting for someone to come who could end it. Alex's heart raced, a flicker of hope sparking within them. You know how to stop it. You know how to break the curse. Elias nodded, his gaze darkening as he glanced toward the door. I know. But the path is not easy, Alex. The entity that haunts this house is ancient. It was not always what it is now. It was once a spirit, a soul, bound by the curse of a forgotten ancestor, an ancestor who believed the entity could be controlled, used even. Alex's mind reeled at the revelation. Controlled? Used? Elias sighed. A deep, weary sound. Yes, your great-great-grandfather. He made a terrible mistake. In his arrogance, he thought he could harness the power of the entity, keep it as a servant, a tool for his own gain. He didn't understand what he was dealing with. The entity isn't a force that can be controlled. It is a predator, a force of pure malice. The moment he tried to bind it, it fought back and it took him, took everything he loved, and cursed this house forever. Alex's mind swam as they processed the information. The entity had not always been a monster, it had once been something else. Something that could be controlled. But why? Why are you here now? Why haven't you been able to stop it all this time? Elias looked down, his eyes clouded with regret. I tried, Alex. I tried to stop it. But the curse, the entity, it's too powerful. When I discovered the truth, when I realized what had been done, I tried to open the door, to find a way to break the bond. But I was too late. The entity claimed me before I could finish what I started. Alex felt a pang of guilt for their uncle. Elias had been trying to do the right thing, trying to fight the same dark force that now threatened to consume Alex. They reached out, but their hand passed right through Elias's form, an eerie reminder that he was no longer truly alive. But you're here now, Alex said, determination creeping into their voice. You can still help me, right? You can help me stop it. Elias's expression softened. I can. But there is one thing you must understand, Alex. The entity is not a simple curse. It's a living, breathing force, and it feeds on the fear, the grief, the darkness of this house. It grows stronger with every soul it traps, every person it consumes. You cannot defeat it by force. You must outwit it. You must destroy its source. Alex felt their heart hammer in their chest. The source. Elias nodded gravely. The source of its power lies beyond the door. That is where the entity draws its strength. You must go there. You must confront it. And you must destroy the heart of its power. Alex shuddered. The thought of going back to the door, of facing whatever lay beyond it, filled them with dread. But they knew Elias was right. The door, the entity, the house, it all led to the same place. They couldn't escape it. Not without finishing what had been started long ago. Elias's form began to flicker, as if the energy sustaining him was fading. I can't stay much longer, Alex. The entity knows I'm here. But remember this, you are not alone. You have the strength to finish this. You have the bloodline that can end it. But how? Alex whispered, desperation in their voice. How do I destroy it? Elias smiled faintly, his form beginning to fade into the darkness. The answer lies in the past, Alex. Trust in the rituals. Trust in your bloodline. And remember, the entity's greatest weakness is its pride. It believes it is invincible. It believes it cannot be defeated. Use that against it. And with that, Elias was gone. The room was silent again, save for the distant echo of the wind outside. But Alex knew what they had to do. The entity's grip was weakening, and the time had come to face it. The final battle was about to begin. With renewed resolve, Alex turned toward the door, the key to everything. Alex stood at the threshold of the door, the weight of the moment pressing down on them like a heavy fog. The house around them seemed to hold its breath, as though it too was waiting for what was to come. Every nerve in Alex's body was on edge, but they couldn't turn back now. Not after everything they had learned, everything they had uncovered. The entity was real, and it was waiting on the other side of this door, and Alex had no choice but to face it. They reached for the door handle, the cold metal sending a jolt of electricity through their fingers. For a moment, their mind flashed back to the whispers, the promises of power, the dark force that had manipulated them and their family for generations. The entity had been patient, biding its time, feeding off the fear and tragedy that had accumulated in this house. Now it was Alex's turn to confront it, to end its reign of terror once and for all. With a deep breath, Alex turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room beyond was not what they expected. It was no longer a simple dark space or a void. The room had transformed, twisting into something far worse, an endless expanse of swirling shadows, where the very walls seemed to ripple like the surface of a dark, disturbed ocean. The air was thick with malice, suffocating, and the temperature plummeted to an unbearable chill. Alex's breath came out in visible puffs, but it wasn't the cold that made their hands shake. It was the presence and overwhelming, suffocating pressure that seemed to seep into their bones, dragging them down. And then it spoke. "So, you've come at last." The voice was a growl, low and primal, reverberating through Alex's very soul. It wasn't just a sound, it was a force, crawling beneath their skin, wrapping around their thoughts. The entity, for the first time, was truly showing itself, its voice dripping with centuries of hunger, rage, and pride. From the shadows, it emerged a form barely discernible in the darkness, but with eyes that gleamed with malevolent intelligence. It was not a simple creature, not a mere shadow. It was something ancient, something vast. Its very presence stretched beyond the room, filling the house, the air, the space around Alex. Alex staggered backward, but there was no room to retreat. The door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang, trapping them inside. "You think you can defeat me?" The entity's voice was a mocking hiss. "You have no idea what you are dealing with. This house is mine. The souls it has consumed are mine. You are just another pathetic mortal, playing at forces beyond your understanding. You will join them." Alex's knees weakened, but they forced themselves to stand tall. The fear threatened to swallow them whole, but they refused to succumb. Not after everything they had learned. Not after everything Elias had told them. The entity laughed, a terrible, cold sound that made Alex's skin crawl. "Your uncle? He was weak, just like you. All of you are weak. That's why I have taken this place, and why it will be mine forever. You cannot stop me." "I don't need to stop you," Alex said, their voice shaky but resolute. "I need to undo what was done. This house, this curse, it doesn't control me. Not anymore." The entity's laugh faltered, replaced by a growl of fury. "You cannot undo it. You are too late. The ritual has already been completed. I am the master now, and you are nothing." Alex knew what they had to do. They couldn't outfight the entity, no one could. But they had the knowledge. The key to its undoing lay within the ritual, within the very bloodline that had cursed this house in the first place. The ritual that Elias had failed to complete, the ritual that could sever the entity's connection to this place. Alex's fingers fumbled through the leather-bound journal they had found, the journal that had belonged to their great-great Jerome. It detailed the ritual, its origins, its steps, and the key to its power, the blood of the house's rightful heir. The entity's form rippled in the darkness, its shape shifting as it moved closer, a twisted shadow that seemed to stretch and reach for Alex, its eyes glowing with malevolent hunger. "You think your blood will save you? You think you can end me with some pathetic ritual?" The entity sneered. "You're nothing, just like your ancestor. Weak, impotent." Alex's fingers tightened around the pages of the journal, the ancient words and symbols leaping off the page in a dance of light and shadow. They began to chant, their voice growing stronger with each word. The air around them crackled with energy, and the entity recoiled, its form flickering. "No," it hissed. "You cannot." But Alex pressed on. They felt the power of the ritual coursing through their veins, felt their blood awakening in response to the words they spoke. This was their legacy, their family's dark history, but it was also their strength. The entity had underestimated them. It had underestimated the will of a bloodline determined to break free. The room began to shift, the shadows twisting and warping around Alex as the ritual took hold. The entity howled in rage, its form convulsing, as if the very walls of the house were rejecting it. Alex's heart raced, the weight of the moment pressing down on them, but they couldn't stop now. Not when they were so close. With a final, desperate cry, Alex finished the incantation. The entity screamed, a sound that shook the very foundation of the house. It writhed in agony, its form collapsing in on itself. The walls of the room trembled, and the floor beneath Alex's feet seemed to pulse with raw, violent energy. For a moment, the room was filled with blinding light, so bright that Alex had to shield their eyes. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went still. The shadows faded. The temperature returned to normal. The oppressive presence that had filled the house was gone. Alex stood in the center of the room, breathing heavily, their heart pounding in their chest. They looked around. The darkness had lifted, and the house, once again, felt like a home, a place that had been haunted by the past but was now free. But there was no time to celebrate. The door, now silent and still, remained closed behind them. And Alex knew that even though the battle had been won, the house's history was far from over. As they turned to leave, the faintest whisper brushed against their ear, a voice from beyond, one they knew too well. "Well done, Alex." Alex. It was Elias, and for the first time the voice carried no malice, only pride. The aftermath of the final battle left Alex in a dazed, surreal silence. The air, once thick with terror, had grown still, almost unnaturally so. The house felt different, its oppressive weight lifted, but there was an unsettling emptiness, as if it was holding its breath. Walls no longer whispered. The floors no longer creaked with unseen footsteps. But there was an eerie sense that something still lingered beneath the surface, something that might never fully let go. Alex stood in the center of the room, breathing heavily, their mind racing. The ritual had been completed, the entity defeated for now. But the house, so deeply entwined with the malevolent presence, was still a place of nightmares, its sinister history forever etched into its very foundation. Slowly, Alex turned to face the door. The space beyond it was quiet, but the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to sway with an almost imperceptible life of their own. The door had been sealed. The entity was gone. But was it truly? Was it possible that the evil had simply retreated, biding that simp, waiting for the right moment to strike again? Alex took a cautious step toward the door, but as their hand reached for the handle, a strange unease settled over them. It was as though the door, once so inviting, now held an invisible barrier of force, perhaps, that could pull them back into the darkness if they weren't careful. "You did it," a voice whispered. It was Elias's voice, but it didn't carry the warmth of approval Alex had hoped for. Instead, it was laced with sorrow, regret. "But you should have known there are consequences to every action." Alex froze, their hearts skipping a beat. The voice had no physical source, it seemed to emanate from everywhere at once, filling the room with a cold, insidious presence. The temperature dropped once more, the familiar chill creeping up Alex's spine. They turned to look around, but the room seemed unchanged. Still, the air felt heavier, denser, as though something unseen was moving in the shadows, circling just beyond the edges of their vision. "You thought you could break the cycle," the voice continued. "You thought you could stop the curse. But the house doesn't let go so easily." A heavy weight seemed to press down on Alex, a physical manifestation of the truth dawning on them. They could feel the presence of the entity again, its essence lingering in the house, like smoke after a fire that refuses to dissipate. It wasn't gone. It had merely been pushed back, but the foundation of its power was still here, rooted in the house, in its walls, its floors, its very air. And then the walls trembled, a low, guttural rumble vibrating through the house. The door that had been sealed seemed to pulse as though alive. The entity was not gone, Alex realized. It had been wounded, yes, but it was far from defeated. In that moment, Alex understood that they were not free. The house had not relinquished its hold. The curse, though weakened, was still in place. They had broken the entity's immediate power, but they had not undone the foundation of the house itself. Alex turned back toward the door. The handle was cold, almost icy to the touch. They could feel it pulling them toward it, beckoning them to open it once more, to step through and confront whatever was still lurking on the other side. But what if they were wrong? What if by opening the door again they would unleash something worse than what they had already faced? "Leave now," the voice of Elias whispered again, though this time it carried a tone of urgency. "You've done enough. Don't go any further." But Alex was already moving, their legs taking them toward the door. There was no turning back. The need to know, to end this once and for all, was overwhelming. They could feel the pull of the unknown, a magnetic force drawing them in, an all-consuming curiosity that drowned out the voice of reason. They reached for the handle once again, and as their fingers closed around it, they felt a surge of energy, an electric pulse that ran through their arm, up their spine. The door shuddered beneath their touch, and with a final, forceful tug, Alex opened it. What lay beyond was not the same as before. The room that had once been dark, empty, and endless now stretched into a blinding void. The swirling shadows were no longer subtle, they were alive, writhing, seething, and reaching for Alex with unnatural speed. The air felt heavy, thick with the promise of something terrible, something far more powerful than before. A cold, clammy fog poured from the depths of the room, engulfing Alex, suffocating them with its icy grip. "No," Alex whispered, their voice trembling as they took a step backward. I didn't mean to." But the door slammed shut behind them, the loud bang reverberating through the walls, trapping them inside. The entity, once again, began to form, its shadowy figure rising from the darkness, its eyes glowing with pure malice. "You thought you could escape?" the voice mocked. "You thought you could defeat me? But now you will join the others. You will remain here forever." Alex's heart pounded in their chest, panic rising as the shadows closed in. They could feel the entity's power surging around them, wrapping its tendrils around their mind, pulling them toward the darkness. But just as quickly as it had begun, the room seemed to freeze. The shadows faltered, retreating for a moment, and Alex felt a strange force in the air, a faint glimmer of hope. They couldn't stop the entity completely, but perhaps there was still a chance. With one final surge of willpower, Alex reached for the ritual book, the pages still warm from their previous use. The incantation, though difficult, was still there, waiting for them to finish what had been started. The house was not done with them yet, but neither were they. The battle wasn't over. Not yet. As Alex began to recite the final words of the incantation, the entity let out a shrill cry, its form flickering, wavering in the light. And for a moment, just a moment, the house held its breath. But would it be enough? The dawn broke softly, casting a pale light over the now silent house. The air was still, its oppressive weight lifted, but the silence seemed unnatural, like the calm before a storm. Alex stood on the front steps, staring back at the house. It looked ordinary, mundane even. No creaking walls, no whispering winds, no ominous shadows. Just a house nestled in the quiet of the morning light. But Alex knew better. The house had not forgotten. It never could. They had escaped physically, but the memories of the horrors they'd experienced would haunt them for the rest of their life. Each step they took away from the house felt like a release, but it was also a disquieting freedom, like leaving a nightmare behind only to carry the unsettling feeling of it with them forever. As Alex drove away, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, the silhouette of the door still imprinted in their mind. A door that had once seemed so simple, so innocuous. But now it would always be there, in the shadows of their thoughts, in the places they couldn't quite see but could feel creeping around the edges of their consciousness. Had they truly escaped? Alex wasn't sure. The pull of the house, the door, and the entity had been so powerful, It felt like an open wound that could never fully heal. What had they really broken? The curse, or was it simply waiting, biding its time until it found a new victim? They had severed the entity's hold over them for the moment, but the truth of the house, of the door, remained. Alex knew that somewhere, in another time, another person might be drawn to that very house, unaware of the darkness that it contained. It was not just the house that was cursed. The door had somehow woven its tendrils into Alex's very soul, leaving a mark that would never fade. Even as the world moved forward, Alex would find themselves haunted by flashes of shadow, glimpses of figures in their peripheral vision, whispers just beyond the range of hearing. The house had a way of staying with you, long after you thought you had left it behind. A few months later, Alex tried to move on. They found a new place to live, and though it was small and simple, it was peaceful. But late at night, when the wind howled outside or when the lights flickered, the images would return, those dark shadows, the oppressive atmosphere, the feeling of being watched. They could almost hear the whispers from the door, urging them to return, to open it once more, to see what lay beyond. One night, as Alex sat in their living room, the doorbell rang. Startled, they rose from the couch, hesitating before opening the door. A cold feeling washed over them, the hairs on the back of their necks standing at attention as if something unseen was waiting. They opened the door. A young couple stood there, smiling, eager. They were looking for a new house. A place with character, they said. Something unique. Alex's heart sank. The couple mentioned they had found an old, large home on the outskirts of town. They had heard it was available, though no one had lived in it for years. They seemed excited, not understanding why Alex's hand trembled on the doorknob, or why the faintest flicker of fear crossed their face. It was the same house. Alex had left, but the house still stood silent, waiting. The door that once beckoned them now seemed to call to the couple, eager to claim its next victim. They smiled at Alex, oblivious to the horrors lurking behind the walls, the presence that had once tormented their mind, waiting for another to open it. The couple's words seemed distant as the air around Alex grew heavier, as if the house itself was reaching out, its presence lingering, refusing to let them go. As the couple walked away, Alex stood in the doorway, watching them, heart pounding. Their footsteps echoed in the night as they headed toward the house, toward the door. The door would never truly be closed. It had never been about one person, one soul. It was the door that had existed long before Alex had set foot in the house, and it would remain long after they were gone. The memories of the house, the horrors they had faced, would remain with Alex forever, but they were not the only ones who would be touched by it. In the distance, the silhouette of the house loomed dark and ominous, like a phantom in the night, waiting for the next soul to step across its threshold. Its door stood silent but never truly forgotten, its evil still present, waiting for the next doorbell to ring. And so the cycle would continue.